Some say the Buddha's silence was the loudest teaching he ever gave. Before words, before scriptures, before temples and schools, there was only a man who sat beneath a tree and saw through everything. He did not wish to build a religion or create a legacy. He simply pointed, like someone showing the moon. But when he was gone, people began to argue about the finger that pointed. One said, he meant this. Another said, no, he meant that. And so one truth began to bloom into many colors, each beautiful, each incomplete. If you wander deep into mountains, you may find 3 paths that seem to lead in different directions. One is narrow and steep, where each step feels like a quiet vow. Another is broad and filled with laughter, where travelers carry not only their own burdens, but also the sorrows of others. The third winds through mist and mystery, where even the shadows become teachers. Some call these paths Theravāda, Mahāyāna, and Vajrayāna. Yet to the wind that passes through the trees, names mean nothing. Every path, after all, still climbs the same mountain. Theravāda, they say, is the path of the elders, the way of those who walk with careful steps and faithful hearts. But what if Theravāda is not a tradition, but a mirror that reflects the discipline of your own heart, the patience of your own awakening? In a world that rushes toward instant results, Theravāda whispers, there is no rush. Liberation is not a victory. It is a quiet seeing, the slow unfolding of understanding, like a lotus opening one petal at a time. I once met an old monk in Chiang Mai who had lived in silence for 40 years. When I asked him why, he smiled and said, because the Buddha never stopped speaking. I just needed to listen. That night, as the forest sang in the dark, I understood what he meant. Theravāda is not about clinging to old words, but about hearing them in every breath, every step, every act of awareness. That is the real scripture, the kind that disappears the moment you read it, because it has already entered your being. But there's another silence, not the silence of solitude, but the silence of compassion. It is the quiet that falls when a mother lifts her child from danger, or when a stranger shares their last bowl of rice. This silence is called Mahāyāna, and it whispers, if you reach the shore of awakening, turn back. Someone is still drowning. To awaken in this way is not to escape, but to return, not to rise above suffering, but to cradle it until it changes shape. I once heard a story in Kyoto about a monk who asked his master, why do we pray for all beings when most will never hear our words? The master poured tea until the cup overflowed and said, even if no one drinks, the fragrance still fills the air. That is Mahāyāna, to keep pouring, not because the world is empty, but because your heart refuses to be. And then, far above the clouds, another path appears, fierce, luminous, alive. In the cold winds of Tibet, the monks there do not avoid the storm. They dance with it. They believe the same fire that burns you can also light your path, if you hold it with wisdom. This is Vajrayāna, the diamond way, where even poison can become medicine. While others walk step by step, the Vajrayāna practitioner leaps into the abyss, trusting that wings will appear on the way down. It is not a shortcut, but an act of courage, to face every shadow and bow until even darkness begins to shine. But maybe these 3 paths are not 3 at all. Maybe they are seasons of the same tree. Theravāda the root, Mahāyāna the trunk, Vajrayāna the flower. The root anchors, the trunk rises, the flower blooms, and none can exist without the others. Yet humans, in their longing for certainty, still argue about which is true. They forget that the tree does not argue with itself. The Buddha left no successor, no temple, no fixed words, because he trusted truth to wear many faces and still be truth. But we turn silence into doctrine and simplicity into systems. We take peace and turn it into sides. Perhaps the real teaching was never about agreement, but about presence. Perhaps what matters is not the path, but the silence that every path leads to. Somewhere under the same moon, 3 monks sit in meditation. One breathes for himself. One breathes for all beings. One breathes for the cosmos. Yet, when the wind passes through their robes, it sounds the same. Maybe that is the secret, that the path doesn't matter as much as the stillness it reveals. Because when you find that stillness, you stop asking which way to go. You simply begin to walk. They say compassion is soft, but that is only what the unawakened eye sees. True compassion is not fragile. It is the strength to hold the whole world in your chest and not break. It is the quiet courage to open your heart even when it keeps bleeding. In the Mahāyāna way, compassion is not an emotion, not pity, not kindness. It is understanding carried to its highest vibration. To see another's suffering as your own, not as a concept, but as an unshakable truth. That is the mirror. When the Buddha looked at the world and saw its endless cycles of birth and death, he did not look away. That is why his eyes are always half open. Half in the world, half beyond it. Once, a student asked his master, "How can I love all beings when I can barely love myself?" The master replied, "Start by breathing." The student frowned. "That's too simple." The master smiled. "Then you don't understand how difficult it is." To breathe, truly breathe, means to be fully here. And in that full presence, there is no self and other. The walls between you and the world dissolve, and compassion flows naturally, like water finding its way downhill. In the Mahāyāna path, wisdom without compassion is dry, and compassion without wisdom is blind. The two must dance, like moonlight on still water. One illuminates, the other reflects. But most of us, lost in our own noise, forget how to be still enough to see the reflection. We want to fix the world without fixing our gaze. We speak of kindness while our hearts are still restless. And so our compassion becomes selective, conditional, an echo, not a song. The Bodhisattva, however, does not love because the world deserves it. The Bodhisattva loves because the world is. To be a Bodhisattva is to make a vow that has no end, to walk back into the burning house even after finding the door out. It is the paradox of infinite compassion. To free others while knowing there is no other to free. In that paradox lies the secret of awakening. I remember once standing on a coal bridge in Kyoto, watching an old man feed the crows. Every morning he came with a small paper bag of rice, and every morning they waited. I asked him why he did it. He said, "Because yesterday they waited. That was all. No philosophy, no goal. Just a circle of gentle understanding, a rhythm beyond logic. That is Mahāyāna, the infinite loop of giving and receiving that dissolves both giver and receiver." In our modern age, compassion has been turned into slogans, campaigns, and hashtags, loud, glittering, fleeting. But true compassion has no audience. It is what happens in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when you forgive before being asked, when you listen without needing to reply, when you touch the suffering of the world and don't turn away. The great danger of the ego is that it wants to be compassionate, rather than vanish in compassion. The ego wants to be the savior, the helper, the enlightened one. But Mahāyāna asks you to dissolve even that, to give without the sense of giving, to act without a trace of self. That is the hardest teaching. Once a monk asked his master, "When will I know I have attained compassion?" The master looked up at the sky and said, "When you can watch a bird fly away and not wish it to stay." To love without possession, to help without attachment, to feel without drowning. This is the diamond edge of compassion. The mind that clings to doing good is still caught in the web of self, but the heart that simply is good, that is freedom. Mahāyāna does not ask us to escape the world, but to see through it, not to deny pain, but to touch it so deeply that it loses its name. Every tear becomes a mantra, every wound a teacher, every encounter a chance to bow. And maybe, when you stop trying to save the world, you begin to see that the world was never broken. It was only waiting for you to notice. The mirror of compassion does not reflect perfection. It reflects wholeness, the kind that includes both the broken and the healed, the sinner and the saint, the sorrow and the joy. When you see all of it and still say, yes, this too belongs, that is awakening. The Bodhisattva does not walk ahead of others, but beside them, in the dust, in the dark, whispering, we'll go together, and maybe, when no one is left to save, the vow will finally keep itself. They say enlightenment is peace, but that is only half the story. True awakening is not always gentle. Sometimes it burns. Sometimes it tears apart the illusions you've built, brick by brick, until nothing remains but the raw pulse of being. Vajrayāna calls this the diamond path, not because it is beautiful, but because it cannot be broken. It is a way of turning poison into medicine, darkness into flame, fear into clarity. To walk this path is to stop running from your shadow and instead invite it in for tea. While the world prays for light, the Vajrayāna master prays for storm, for thunder, for the mirror that cracks wide enough to show what's real beneath the reflection. I once met a Tibetan monk in Dharamsala who said, the easiest way to find God is to lose everything you love. He wasn't cruel. He had simply learned that clinging is the root of suffering, and only when your hands are empty can they hold the truth. In this way, Vajrayāna is not the path of escape. It is a path of embrace. It asks you not to rise above your pain, but to look so deeply into it that it becomes your teacher. Every fear hides a wisdom. Every desire hides a lesson. Every shadow, when held in awareness, begins to glow. The fire does not destroy. It refines. But few have the courage to stand inside the fire. We prefer incense in temples, prayers and philosophies, anything but the rawness of seeing ourselves without disguise. Yet the masters say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Not because the Buddha is your enemy, but because the image you worship will block your path. Vajrayāna is ruthless compassion. It tears away the comfortable lies we hide behind. It whispers, you cannot awaken while pretending. In the monasteries of Tibet, students meditate among skulls and symbols of impermanence, not to glorify death, but to remember life. The skull is not morbid. It is honest. It says, you have this moment. Use it. That is the pulse of Vajrayāna. No postponement. No waiting for a perfect time. Because the moment you delay awakening, you are asleep again. The diamond path is direct. It cuts through excuses. And yet in its fierceness, it is tender. For when you finally stop hiding, compassion blooms naturally, fierce and clear. Once a student asked his master, why must we visualize wrathful deities? They scare me. The master smiled. Because your fear is your teacher. The face you fear most may be your own. In Vajrayāna, demons are not banished. They are invited to sit beside you until they lose their names. The fire becomes light when you stop trying to escape the heat. The darkness begins to shimmer when you stop calling it an enemy. This is the alchemy of the soul, to take everything you once rejected and turn it into part of your prayer. In the West, people seek comfort in spirituality, a soft cushion for the restless mind. But true practice is not comfort. It is confrontation. to face what you most avoid until avoidance itself disappears. There's a saying among the old teachers: when you light a candle, you also create a shadow. The trick is not to chase away the shadow, but to learn to dance with it. The dance of Vajrayāna is wild, unpredictable, ecstatic. It does not promise safety. It offers truth, and truth is not safe. It is alive. It moves like lightning through your veins, shattering every certainty, every mask, until only awareness remains, naked, vast, and unafraid. Some think this path is violent. It is not violence. It is intensity, like fire that purifies gold. It leaves nothing impure untouched. To step into that fire is to let the small self die again and again until death itself loses its meaning. I once saw a monk meditate in the snow, bare-chested, melting the frost around him just by breathing. I asked him if it was power. He said, "No, it is surrender. The body listens when the mind is silent." That is Vajrayāna, not control, but union, not conquering the elements, but remembering you are the elements. The fire that becomes light is not separate from you. It burns inside your chest every time you face what hurts and do not turn away. Every time you forgive yourself for being human. Every time you fall, bow and rise again. The teachings are not in the temples. They are in the way you speak when angry, in how you love when afraid, in how you keep walking when everything you believe begins to dissolve. The diamond is not found in the mountain. It is the mountain carved by time and pressure into clarity. And so it is with you. The world will press, break, grind, polish you, until you shine, not because you escaped the pain, but because you became transparent to it. To live like this is to live beyond fear, to die before you die, to see that even your suffering is holy, because it led you here, to this breath, this awareness, this fire that no longer burns but illuminates. And when you reach that place where even enlightenment feels like another illusion, you will smile, because you will see there was never a mountain, never three paths, never a destination. There was only the walk, the breath, the endless unfolding of now. And in that stillness, the fire finally rests as light. In the end, every path disappears. The pilgrim who has walked through discipline, through compassion, through fire, finds no road beneath his feet. Only the sky remains, vast and silent. This is the paradox the Buddha never tried to explain. Because truth, when spoken, becomes divided, but in silence, it returns whole. Theravāda taught you to look inward, to see how the mind clings and how letting go is freedom. Mahāyāna taught you to turn outward, to see that the world's pain is your own and that love has no boundary. Vajrayāna taught you to stand in the fire, to see that even illusion is sacred when met with awareness. Yet when you arrive here at the summit where all paths meet, you realize they were never different trails but different ways of remembering the same thing, that the seeker and the sought have always been one. The mountain was never climbed. It unfolded beneath your steps. The silence you feared in the beginning has now become your home. Once you tried to name it nirvana, emptiness, enlightenment, but now even those words fall away like leaves at the end of autumn. What remains cannot be named because it is what names are made of. It is not the absence of sound, but the presence of everything unspoken. The masters say, when you reach the end of the path, you will laugh, not because it was easy, but because you finally understand the joke. There was no path, no traveler, no destination, only walking. To awaken is not to arrive somewhere else. It is to wake up here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this very imperfection. When the monk sweeps the courtyard, enlightenment is in the dust that rises. When a mother holds her crying child, The Buddha smiles through her tears. When a man fails, breaks, forgives, and begins again, that too is the way. The teaching was never meant to lift you out of life, but to drop you into it so completely that nothing is left outside. The Buddha never asked us to worship him. He asked us to see ourselves. He pointed at the moon, and we built temples around the finger. But perhaps now, after all these centuries, we are ready to look up again. The silence beyond paths is not empty. It is alive, shimmering, breathing. It holds every voice that ever prayed, every question that was never answered, every step taken in search of meaning. It is not something to reach. It is what has always been here, waiting for you to stop searching. In that stillness, even the concept of awakening dissolves. You no longer want to become light, because you see that you already are. You no longer chase truth, because truth has been quietly walking beside you all along. The three paths, the root, the trunk, the flower, have merged into one tree, and even that tree fades into the forest of being. What remains is the wind, carrying no doctrine, no name, just breath. And in that breath, all Buddhas bow to all beings, for there is no higher and lower, no teacher and student, no enlightened and lost, only the great rhythm of awareness pulsing through everything. The sound of one hand clapping is not silence. It is a sound of the universe realizing itself. You do not need to understand it. You only need to listen. The leaf that falls is not separate from the tree, and you are not separate from the cosmos. The awakening you seek is already happening. Now, in this sentence, in the pause between words. That pause is the teaching. That silence is the way. When you stop trying to hold it, it holds you. When you stop trying to see it, it becomes your sight. The Buddha smiled not because he had answers, but because he no longer needed them. The questioner had disappeared. Only the smile remained. So walk gently now. The mountain is breathing. The wind knows your name. And in the stillness beyond paths, the universe whispers what has been saying all along. You were never separate. You were never lost. You were never two. When you descend from the mountain, the world is no longer what it was. The same streets, the same faces, the same noise, yet something invisible has changed. The silence you carried from the summit now walks beside you, unnoticed by others, but felt in every heartbeat. You do not preach. You do not teach. You simply live. The greatest teaching is no longer words, but presence. When someone shouts, you listen deeply enough to hear their pain beneath the sound. When someone smiles, you see the whole universe reflected in their eyes. You no longer ask, "What is enlightenment?" Because you have learned that enlightenment is this breath, this tea cooling on a table, this gentle awareness watching the world unfold without trying to own it. The monks once sought to escape suffering, to reach the other shore. But now, as you walk among the crowds, you understand there was never another shore. The river itself was the path. Every step, every mistake, every heartbreak was part of the awakening. You realize that wisdom is not in knowing, but in seeing clearly without fear. Compassion is not pity, but understanding that every person is fighting an unseen battle. You no longer divide people into good and bad, right and wrong. You see that all our waves are turning to the same ocean, each carrying a story written in salt and time. Once, you thought the Buddha was a statue, a distant light to be worshipped. Now you see him in the beggar, in the child running barefoot, in the tired eyes of a nurse after midnight. The sacred has left the temples and moved into the pulse of the everyday. This is a paradoxical return. When you stop searching for heaven, the world itself becomes holy. You drink water, and it tastes like a teaching. You hear laughter, and it sounds like a mantra. Even pain becomes precious because it reveals where love still hides. You do not need to change the world. You only need to see it clearly, and in that seeing, everything changes. The Buddha never promised escape. He offered awakening. And awakening is not leaving the dream, but realizing that the dreamer and the dream are one. The man who walks through fire learns not how to avoid burning, but how to become flame without fear. The woman who loses everything learns that what is real can never be lost. The return is not an ending. It is a beginning of true seeing. You realize that the teachings were never meant to take you away from life, but to return you to it more open, more tender, more free. The mountain remains behind you, but its silence hums within your veins. You carry the stillness of Theravāda, the compassion of Mahāyāna, the transformative power of Vajrayāna, but you carry them lightly, like wind. You walk through markets, traffic, laughter, and grief, and every sound is the Dharma speaking in another voice. You have no label now, no school, no tradition, and yet you belong to all of them. You have nothing to teach, yet your very being teaches. You bow to everything, the light, the shadow, the confusion, for all are teachers wearing different masks. One day, someone may ask you, "What did you find?" And you will smile because there are no words left to answer. You will pour them a cup of tea, and in that gesture, the whole universe will bow. The return is not about going back. It is about going through fear into peace, through noise into silence, through life into life again. You walk on barefoot, among shadows and light, knowing that wherever you go, the path unfolds beneath your steps, because now the path is you. And so, after all the mountains and temples and long nights of meditation, you find yourself right back where you began, here, in this moment, watching, breathing, listening. The wind outside your window is the same one that brushed against the Buddha's robe under the Bodhi tree. The same silence that filled those ancient forests is filling your room now. It has always been here, but you only learned to hear it after all the noise fell away. The story of Theravāda, Mahāyāna, and Vajrayāna was never really about Buddhism. It was about us, about the human longing to find meaning, to find home, to find something that never changes even when everything else fades. We built temples, memorized sutras, crossed oceans, argued for centuries over what enlightenment means. And yet, the truth never left us. It was in the breath we forgot to notice, the smile we ignored, the moment we finally stopped trying to become and simply were. You may think the story ends here with awakening, with silence, with peace. But perhaps the story only begins now, when you take that silence and carry it into the world, when you look at a stranger and truly see them, when you forgive someone who never said sorry, when you choose to stay kind even when the world isn't. That is the real continuation of the path. The Buddha did not ask for followers. He asked for awakeners, people who dare to look within and then turn outward with love. And maybe that's why you're here, not just to learn, but to remember. This channel, this space we share is not about teaching you what to believe. It's about creating a place where questions are sacred, where doubt is not weakness, but the first light of understanding. Each video, each reflection, is another ripple in this vast ocean of inquiry. So if you found even a flicker of calm, even a breath of clarity here, stay. Walk with us. Subscribe not because you must, but because you wish to keep walking this quiet road together. Let every click be a small act of mindfulness, not to collect content, but to stay connected to a community that is trying, in its own imperfect way, to wake up, The ancient teachers said that a single spark of awareness can light up 1,000 dark nights. Perhaps this small corner of the digital world can be that spark, a candle in the noise, a space where we pause, breathe, and remember what it means to be alive. As you listen now, maybe your mind wanders. That's okay. Awareness is not about stopping the wandering, but about realizing that the one who notices is already free. Every time you return to the present, you practice awakening. Every time you share that awareness, by being gentle, by being curious, by being kind, you become part of the same lineage that began 2,500 years ago under a tree in India. The monks meditated to find peace. You can do it by simply closing your eyes and breathing once deeply. They sought to understand the nature of suffering. You could begin by understanding your own. And as you do, you'll discover something astonishing, that even in this fast, loud, glowing digital age, the Dharma is not lost. It has only changed its voice. It speaks now through pixels and screens, through your quiet listening. You are part of that transmission. You are part of that living tradition of awareness flowing through time. And one day, perhaps someone lost, tired, searching for meaning will stumble upon your voice, your presence, your small act of calm, and they will feel the same stillness you feel now. This is how the path continues. Not through temples of stone, but through hearts awake to the moment. So breathe. Let the silence echo. Let it remind you that the teacher was never out there. It was always inside. If you wish, stay with us. Subscribe, not to chase enlightenment, but to keep remembering. Each time you return, bring your questions, your doubts, your heart. Together, we will sit again in this boundless now and listen not for answers, but for the sound of awakening itself. Because the echo after silence is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of understanding. The Buddha smiled not because he knew, but because he had finally stopped needing to know. May you find that same smile tonight in your own reflection. May your breath be gentle. May your heart be vast. And may we meet again here in the quiet space between two thoughts, where the path begins anew.